Hi, Tom Rotolo with City Quake and Kingdom Business Network, and glad you're on for our call here. We've been meeting about every 3 to 4 weeks, and these calls, Kingdom Business Network is specifically designed to equip folks as they head to work, as they head to the workplace, whether they're CEO, president, whatever in a company, or they're flipping hamburgers, or they're stocking shelves or whatever, but help them to be the most effective for Jesus. You know, it talks about in Colossians, do your work heartily as unto the Lord. And it's not only doing your work heartily, but having a witness there at work. And that's really what we're about here in Kingdom Business Network. And I'm, with what I've seen the Lord do with me over my life, it's really been a process of uncorking bottlenecks. And I know way back with Randy Clark, there was a bottleneck of faith in the United States, lack of faith really, for miracles. And then also he had a bottleneck of finances in his ministry, and the Lord used me to uncork that bottleneck. And then helping then starting Power and Love, and then helping Todd White, and different times the Lord's given me specific ideas about uncorking bottlenecks. And I really believe that Kingdom Business Network is supposed to, I believe there's a bottleneck for Christians in their workplace. And that bottleneck is that we go to work, we know we're Christians, we know we need to do a good job and represent Jesus in terms of the type of work we do, but the bottleneck is still that we're not being effective at being witnesses, at testifying about Jesus and bringing the amazing goodness of this gospel, the amazing, not just the gospel in words, but the gospel in power to our workplace. And so I'm just going to keep us going here right over to Anthony Polenski. We have him on today, and I'm really glad we do. I've just been getting to know Anthony, who at 24 years old, when he's atheist, he's involved in drugs and alcohol, pornography, whatever, but yet the Lord reaches down and touches his life. I'd love to hear you share real quick, Anthony, in a second here about that story of how you got touched by the Lord. But so he was touched, and he really thought he was going to be a missionary, because his heart was so given over the Lord. But I love it in that the Lord said, yes, you're going to be a missionary, but you're going to be a missionary in the technology world, and which the technology world needs lots of missionaries right now. So anyway, we're going to hear about that. Anthony, I'm going to welcome you. I think I might have to unmute you, or you maybe, can you unmute yourself, Anthony?
I think so. Can everybody hear me?
Okay, good. Perfect. All right. Yes, I think you're good to go.
Awesome.
Good. So welcome. You're up in the Northwest, and I'm here on the East Coast, and folks everywhere in between here joining on. So if you got on late, welcome, Kingdom Business Network with Anthony Polenski. And so, yeah, why don't you just start off and kind of share just a little bit about that story? So you're atheist, drug addict, or I don't know if you're a drug addict, but using drugs at least. And so what happened?
I was an addict. Let's just get it out
there. Drug addict.
Yeah.
You can't sugarcoat it.
I was as deep into all of that as possible. And I mean, to net out the story, it was, I was taught, as an atheist, being a man is, achieve money, success, wealth, women, all of that. And when I achieved that, in my early 20s, I worked for a professional sports organization, drove a Lexus, and I found out that everything I was promised would deliver joy did not deliver, and I was bankrupt, lost, had no idea. The dad that I loved, like, this is what he was taught, and so I was wrestling. I didn't understand why was I here. I was suicidal. I got heavy into drugs, alcohol, all of that, and literally didn't want to live anymore. I mean, I was trying to use enough drugs so that I wouldn't wake up, and so God is so gracious, because in that season, I graduated from college somehow as a functioning addict. I still got my degree, and through 2 DUIs and a bunch of circumstances to net it out, the Lord just began to speak. Like, it was undeniable that there was a power that was after me. And I knew at that point
Wow.
I was broken enough to go, you know what, I need your help, Lord. Like there's something I need. I didn't know who that was, but I started to just ask the universe, and the universe answered. And it was very clear from the beginning that Yeshua, I love his Hebrew name, Yeshua means salvation has
Oh
come.
yeah.
He is the one that was after me. And so it was supernatural events, things happening. And the true salvation experience for me was I relapsed after being baptized, and I just hit rock bottom, and I cursed God and I yelled at him, and I ended up in a psychiatric ward face down on the floor. I can still smell the carpet. And I
Wow.
cried like King David, like, Lord, my sins against you and you alone. And I repented. I was like, God, I'm sorry. And it was like the collision of his love with my sin. And he said to me, he said, the reason you're stuck is because you have boulders of guilt and shame. And he said, do you want those removed? And I
Now,
was
how when he said this to you, was this more like in your heart, in your mind? How was it?
not audibly, in my spirit. It was face on the floor. I could hear his voice. I mean, so hard to describe, but it was in my
Yeah.
spirit. He was like, you have guilt and shame. These are boulders. He said, do you want them removed? And I said, yes, Lord, you know I do. And I mean, he literally reached down, and I always tell people I physically felt forgiven. Like I felt his love. I mean, I was weeping. I mean, the fire of God came down, and I walked out of that room, and the people in the psychiatric ward, I was so bad the day before, the people in the ward were staying away from me. Okay, so think about that for a second. And I come out like fire of God blazing, and just preaching the gospel, just loving people, praying for people. I was in a ward with cutters, people who cut themselves. I mean, I was praying healing over them. It was beautiful, and that was 12 years ago. So then I go back to my evangelical church, and like people don't know what to do, right? The church I visited a few times in that process, they have no idea what to do with me, right? And so I just continued to burn, and they're like, well, the honeymoon period, it's gonna wear off. Well, I'll tell you this, 12 years later, I'm still in fuego. Let's just call it that. So Jesus is so good, and it's because he gave me a deep healing. That's something I felt the Lord wanted me to share with you guys is, like, I'm standing here not because of anything I have done. I'm standing here because God did a deep healing work in me and undid abuse and all these things that I had endured, and gave me a new name and gave me a purpose and a mission. So that brought me to the time when I said, Lord, send me to Cambodia, Thailand, Southeast Asia, somewhere. Like I'm going preach the gospel to people who've never heard all of that. And he literally said, you're going into the technology business. And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, yes, you are. And so for 2 years, I reluctantly worked in this industry. And he said to me, Anthony, if you will just surrender, if you will come into agreement with my purpose, I will carry you further than you could ever imagine. And so I can remember the weekend it happened, and I said, Lord, I'll do this if you want me to. And that was, about 10 years ago. And
Wow.
my career took off. I'm not a prosperity preacher, but like God did bless me in my work and all of that. And his hand was upon me. And so I just set out to sell technology solutions with every breath of mine dedicated to looking for those opportunities where the Lord put me there to be his mouthpiece and to be his heart, his heartbeat in the office, right? So.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, tell us, since then, I mean, obviously there's blessing and favor on you. He opened up that door, and he really called you to that ministry. But so then what's that been like in terms of you just being a witness there in, I don't know if there's any field that's really easy to be a witness, but technology, people tend to be in their heads. They tend to be, very logical, and God and all that is like pretty much anathema.
Yeah, it's one of the most challenging places to be. I mean, I'm talking to people, a lot of you who are in, corporate America and all that. The things that we stand upon are often not welcome there, right? And so, sorry, I've got pop-ups here. But yeah, so it's not welcome. So it's almost easier, and I've been on mission trips, like it's easier to go to Haiti and preach the gospel. It is so much harder to preach the gospel in both, where I love what you said, Tom, in word and power, right? Not just preaching it, but living it. To do that in an environment that has other aspirations. They have other things that are more important than God. And so I feel like my testimony has been, I have constantly been put in positions where I could tell the Lord had architected something where I had to prove that my idol was not my job. My God was my all in all. Yahweh was my, and so I had to choose. And that's something, you and I talked a little bit about, Tom, is that every time I would wrestle and I would doubt and I would go through those normal human emotions, but then God would just say, Anthony, stand, do this. I've told you to do this. And then I would do it, and he would always take care of me. He'd always do it. And it just was such a beautiful witness to like just, one of the things, encouragement is just stand. Like if God's calling you to something in your workplace, like I'm a living testimony and preach this to myself, like we just have to stand upon it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Give us some examples of like what has he called you to do? I know that's really where the rubber meets the road. We all kind of, in theory, when we're in church and a meeting, yay, Jesus, go, yes, we're going to be witnesses to all nations. But then we get in the workplace and it's like, nothing comes out of our mouth. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard for me to hide my faith in Messiah. It was just out of me. I'm sure like a lot of you. So like with one of my first tech jobs, I just flat out told my boss when I got hired, I said, listen, I want you to know something about me. I said, my passion is Jesus. He's the reason. If you see anything good in me in the workplace, it's Jesus. If you see anything bad in me, it's me. And I just let out with that. And I said, this is what my passion is. And, I'm going to, work and be above reproach, all of that. And I mean, he didn't know what to do with it, but I think he respected it to some degree. And so it was interesting that, he and I developed a relationship. And then at one point he called me out into the hallway on a Monday and said, dude, I need to talk to you. And I thought I was in trouble, but he ended up bearing his soul to me and sharing about his addictions and how he had just relapsed after like many years with heroin. And, he was broken as broken could be. And I had been talking to him about Jesus where possible. And so this was an opportunity where I just, said, listen, like, this is what we've been talking about. Like, you need the power of God to deliver you from this, right? And, you need that. Wow. And so that began a process. And it was funny because then I left and ended up getting another, better job. And I was like, I don't know, 6 months later, 8 months later, where I got a phone call from that friend and he became a great friend. And he said, you're the first person I wanted to reach out to. He said, today, he said, I looked at my watch on the porch of a pastor's house that I ended up meeting, who said, what are you waiting for? It's time for you to give your life to Jesus. What are you waiting for? And he looked down at his watch and it was 3:16. And so he just wept and knew God was after him. And so he confessed Jesus as Lord, called me to share, hey man, thanks for being a light and blah, blah, blah. And then I got to baptize him and we are still great friends to this day. And so for me, it's always just been, just be authentic. Like we don't have to be ashamed of the gospel. Like we don't have to be Bible thumpers hitting people but we can be so distinct in our heart and our love and the way that we live that we provoke them to jealousy just by our presence. And whether some people it offends and others, you're the one I can say that and look at all your faces. I'm sure people come to you and bare their souls because you're the one that carries Jesus inside of you into your workplace. They won't go to a church or to a Christian counselor sometimes, but they'll come to you in the cubicle next door because they're drawn to Jesus. They're not drawn to you. They're drawn to Jesus in you. And it's not something we have to force. It's something that will naturally happen as we avail ourselves to the purposes of God in our workplace. So I think that's what I've seen.